Breatharianism is the belief that someone can and should survive only on air and sunlight, without any food or water. There is a small group of people who believe this and claim that they have gone long periods of time consuming nothing but air. Some people who have passed while attempting this. It is a whole topic that I can explore more at large later, though the most well-known breatharian is an Indian monk, Prahlad Jani. He claims to have not eaten or drinking anything since 1940, saying that the goddess Amba sustained him. He is an interesting character. When he was 7, he went to live in the jungle. At 12, he underwent a spiritual experience, resulting in him becoming a devoted follower of Amba, where he dressed as a female devotee of her. He believed that the goddess provided him with water, which dripped down from a hole in his palate. This is what allowed him to live without any food or water. Since the 1970s, he has lived as a hermit in a cave. Obviously, if you say you haven't eaten or drank anything in decades, people are going to question that. Numerous studies have been conducted on him to try to invalidate his claims. Neurologist Sudhir Shah, who studies people who claim to have exceptional abilities, which is another subject that I would love to explore in the future, observed Prahlad in 2003 for 10 days. He stayed in a sealed room where he passed no stool or urine, though doctors observed that urine did form in his bladder. He was physically well, though noted a hole in his palate would have been abnormal. His weight slightly decreased in these 10 days. It's common knowledge that someone can only survive without fluids for about a week and without food for about a month. And going just a few days without water will usually cause hallucinations to occur. So it is phenomenal that he went 10 days without water. An average person would not be able to accomplish this. Surely he has gone several long periods without water, and his body built an endurance to going without it for days. In 2010, Prahlad was observed again, but this time for 2 weeks. Why neither studies lasted longer, I don't know. Maybe a lack of funding, or they were worried he would literally die and they would be held legally responsible. Experts said this study had the potential to greatly benefit mankind. For people such as soldiers and astronauts who may have to survive days without food and water. The team was intrigued as in these 2 weeks, Prahlad was able to control his body's physiological functions. He received daily clinical examinations, blood tests, and scans. And under constant surveillance by cameras, he was taken out of sealed rooms to have exposure to sun. During the 15 days, Prahlad did not eat, drink, or produce any waste. Even more extraordinary than the first study only lasting 10 days. Though the test showed that urine in his bladder fluctuated, the levels of appetite hormones in his body were tested. Researchers concluded that Prahlad was an extreme example of adaptation to starvation and water restriction. The team announced they plan to conduct further studies on him to see how he was able to maintain hydration levels in his body, how he eliminates waste, and where he gets sustenance from. In 2007, Prahlad was the subject of brain imaging tests, showing the size of his pituitary and pineal glands were the size of a 10-year-old boy's. Harvard directors dismissed the findings of the observations to be impossible. The bodies of profoundly malnourished people consume the body's remaining resources so it can continue to live. This results in liver failure and heart strain. A spokeswoman from the American Dietetic Association commented that fasting for even more than a day can be dangerous. You need food to function. Personally, I have fasted for 2 weeks before, and I am just fine as long as I stay hydrated and make sure to take vitamins and electrolytes. Nutrition researchers accused the team of cheating as Prahlad was allowed to bathe and gargle. The body absorbs water when bathing. The experiment also criticized as at some points Prahlad was allowed to move out of the camera's view. Scientists from Austria, Germany, and the United States have expressed interest in traveling to India to conduct further studies. Prahlad said he would be willing to cooperate. In the Amazon rainforest, a lone native named the Man of the Hole lived for decades. He was the only resident of the Tanaru indigenous territory, which the Brazilian government designated as a protected indigenous territory in 2007. He moved about a lot, lived mostly off of hunting and gathering, and left each of his past homes with a large hole that had no apparent reason. This is why he is known as the Man of the Hole. He did not choose to live alone. Rather, he was forced to do so when his people were wiped out in Brazil's ongoing genocide of indigenous peoples. The bulk of his people are thought to have been massacred by settlers in the 1970s at the same time as similar atrocities were committed against adjacent populations. Except for the Man of the Hole, the remaining survivors perished in a 1995 attack by illegal miners. The ruins of their village, which had been destroyed in 1996, were later uncovered by Brazil's Government Office for Indigenous Interests. It is unknown what they were called, what language they spoke, or what the name of the Man of the Hole was, because they had stayed isolated. In 1996, the government first learned about the Man of the Hole's solitary existence. When he was first observed, he was thought to be in his 30s or 40s. He was unclothed and always armed with a bow and arrow. Agents tried to contact him, though completely understandably, since all his past encounters with outsiders resulted with his entire village being intact. He was protective of himself whenever agents got close. At one point, one man received an arrow to the chest from him. A few months before they made attempts to get near the man, another local village was kind enough to have peaceful contact with the agents. Surprisingly, they were trustworthy, as only 6 members remained. The rest were slain by men with chainsaws and firearms in pursuit of their land. They noticed that he frequently relocated his residence and constructed straw tents as shelter. He went wild game hunting, gathered honey and fruits, and planted manioc and corn. Over the years, more than 50 of his shelters have been located. Each of the houses he abandoned had a large hole in it. These holes were first thought to have been utilized as animal traps or places to hide, but some observers have hypothesized they may have had a spiritual significance. The holes were narrow, no more than 6 feet or 2 meters deep. The abandoned settlement discovered in 1996 had 14 comparable holes. When speaking to the landowners of the area, they will deny any knowledge of the massacres, but will admit their distaste of the Brazilian government adding to their constitution that the lands of indigenous people will be protected, saying it is absurd that one man was granted 31 square miles of land, saying they believe it could have been better put to use to plant crops to provide food thousands. Though, of course, the man and his people had the land first, and it should have not been taken away from them. He has the right to live in peace after dealing with several tragedies in his life. Their argument is ridiculous, as the Amazon has thousands of square miles of land that has been cleared yet remain barren. The man of the whole knew how to survive on his own will, building shelters, growing crops such as corn, and others that I've never heard of before. Pawpaw, a native fruit said to taste like a cross between a mango and a barren and cassava plant. He leaves markings on trees, suggesting to indigenous experts that he is spiritual. They believe this helps him cope with losing everyone he has ever known. Indigenous peoples in Brazil are granted the right to lands they traditionally occupy. 31 square miles of his land were officially recognized as protected indigenous territory in 2007. After this, the government kept an eye on him and worked to keep the region safe. Despite this, in November 2009, armed assailants tried to attack the man of the hole. Fortunately, he managed to escape. The man of the hole was aware that he was being watched by outsiders. Even though he avoided making any more direct contact with others, he received tools and seeds from the government on occasion, which ingrained a certain level of trust for him. He occasionally used signals to warn watching teams to stay clear of traps he had built to either defend himself or catch prey. In order to increase awareness of the dangers facing Brazil's uncontacted people, the government released a film of him in 2018. The man appeared to be in good health in the video and was thought to be in his 50s at the time. 4 years later, on August 24, 2022, he was discovered to have passed by a government agent in his home. He was discovered lying down in a hammock and ornamented with macaw feathers, as if he was waiting for his passing. Before he was found, there were no indications of any violence or other disturbance. He was said to have passed away in July, around 60 years old. A burial was held for him 3 months later. The delay due to disputes of what should happen to his lands. He was buried at his home. The local farmers did not want this, as they wanted possession of the land. Doing research on the man of the hole, I found that tragically, but not surprisingly, there are many cases similar to this all over the world. Uhhhh was the last person from the Native American group Yahi from California. The rest of his people were victims of the 19th century California genocide. He was widely known to be the last known wild Indian, that being their words, not mine, as the rest of the million of them were massacred. He lived most of his life isolated from modern culture. I would too, fuck them. So in 1911, when he was 50, he lived in a barn 2 miles outside downtown Orville. Uhhhh means man in Yana village. He was named by an anthropologist as Yahi culture. He is unable to speak his own name until introduced by another Yahi. When asked for his name, he said, "I have none, because there are no people to name me." He respected his culture decades after the rest of the people who knew it were gone. He was taken in by anthropologists from the University of California in Berkeley, where he was studied, lived and worked as a janitor. In 1865, when he was 4 years old, Ishii and his family were attacked in the Three Knolls Massacre. 40 members of their tribe passed. 33 escaped the attack, though soon after cattlemen slain the other half of them. It is absolutely appalling that 150 years ago, people in this country were hunted down and exterminated like they were pests. We try to make it seem like this was so long ago, but in reality it wasn't. It was only a few generations ago. His people were thought to be extinct, though the remaining members went into hiding for 44 years. Just a few decades prior, the Yana region had near 3,000 people, though the whites managed to rid almost all of them. When the California Gold Rush brought tens of thousands of miners to the area, the settlers were diseased and passed on their smallpox and measles to the Native Americans, as well as killing their fish and scaring their deer from the area. The whites were paid $5 per head of Native American. It's sickening how little our grandparents regarded human life. In writings about the massacre, it was said they jumped into the stream as they were being shot at. Though few escaped, most ended up floating down the river's rapid currents. In 1908, a group of surveyors found the home of Ishii and his family. He, his sister, and his uncle fled. Though his mother was too elderly and sick to flee, she hid herself in blankets. After finding the camp, the men destroyed it. When returning, Ishii discovered that his mother had passed. His sister and uncle never returned. It was thought they had drowned in a nearby river. Ishii spent the next 3 years living alone in the wilderness. Though after wildfires, starving with nowhere to go, he emerged at a slaughterhouse. When he was discovered, the sheriff ordered a worker to handcuff Ishii. He smiled and complied. He was said to be a wild man, and his capture gained curiosity of thousands of people in the area. After being brought to the University of California, he educated anthropologists on his culture who were trying to reconstruct it. He was interviewed and recorded speaking in his native language. It's kind of pathetic that 50 years after massacring their people, they are interested in learning about their culture their grandparents wiped out. Ishii lacked immunity to common diseases and often fell ill. He was treated by a university doctor, and he had a close friendship with him. He taught him how to make bows and arrows, and they often hunted together. On March 25th, 1916, he passed due to tuberculosis. His last words were, "You stay, I go." In his culture, the body should remain intact after passing, so his friends tried to prevent an autopsy, though the university ordered it. His body was cremated and his brain was preserved. Grave goods were placed with his remains before his cremation. These were one of his bows, 5 arrows, a basket of acorn meal, a box full of shell bead money, a purse full of tobacco, 3 rings, and some obsidian flakes. His brain was sent to the Smithsonian Institution in 1917. In 2000, it was given to descendants of a different tribe, who buried it in an unknown location. Honestly, I am completely pissed off about this whole thing. I hope you are too, as you should be. Another story of the last of her kind that I found during my research and wanted to share is that of Demasuda. In Newfoundland, in early 1800s, there was a small group of native people known as Beothuk. In 1818, a group of them took a boat and fishing equipment that belonged to European settlers. In an attempt to get back the stolen property, they went to a Beothuk campsite where a dozen of them fled. though one was chased down in the snow. Her breasts were exposed. She was a nursing mother, Demasduit. She begged for mercy. Her husband, Nanobasut, attempted to negotiate for her release, though he was murdered for this. Her infant son passed a few days later. The men were taken to court for the murder of Nanobasut, though the judge said they had no malice doing this, and bloodshed happens on occasion when retrieving possession from natives. Demasduit was taken to a local priest. He renamed her Mary March after the Virgin Mary and the month she was kidnapped. A year later, numerous attempts were made to return her to our people. Money was raised to help with her return, though she fell ill and passed tuberculosis. She was left in a coffin by the lakeshore where members of her tribe later found it. She was buried with her husband and child. At this time, only 31 members of her people remained. The last known Beothuok, Demasduit's niece, Shanoduhit, passed in 1829. The Mary March Provincial Museum in Newfoundland was named after her. In 2006, a group of second-grade students started a petition for the name to be changed to the Demasduit Museum. Over 500 signatures were collected, and in 2021 the name was changed. Jana Maria, a native Californian woman, and the last surviving member of her tribe, the Nicolino, she was better known to history as the lone woman of San Nicolas Island. Her actual name is unknown. Like others on this list, she was renamed by settlers who found her. From 1835 to her eviction from San Nicolas Island in 1853, she lived alone there off the coast of California. Humans have been living on the Channel Islands for an extensive period of time. Native Americans first settled there 10,000 years ago. Two separate ethnic groups inhabited the archipelago at the time of European contact. The Chumash on the northern Channel Islands, the Tongva on the southern islands. Joanna's tribe, the Nicolinos, were thought to have been linked to the Tongva in some way. Spanish conquistadors explored the California coast in the early 1540s and seized it for Spain. The conquistadors sent to collect her and her people and evict them from her island, but she was left behind as a storm came and they wanted to leave the island quickly. A more sentimental version describes Johanna Maria jumping overboard as she learned her little brother had been left behind, although the story of her jumping overboard does not show up until the 1880s. By that time, the Victorian age was well underway, and a romanticism is prevalent in literature. This version was written down by Johanna Maria's eventual rescuer, who had heard it from a hunter, but he admits he might have misheard. There are various versions of how the lone woman was found, even though it is generally acknowledged that a priest tried to find her by paying a man $200, but he was unsuccessful. Several other expositions were launched by others. The first two attempts failed to find her, but the third in 1853, they discovered human footprints on the beach and pieces of seal blubber which had been left out to dry. Further investigation led to the discovery of Johanna Maria, who was living on the island in a hut partially built with whale bones. She was dressed in a skirt made of green cormorant feathers, a native bird. It was believed that she also lived in a nearby cave. Afterwards, she was taken to the mainland, but was only able to communicate with 3 remaining members of her tribe. The local natives could not understand her. They tried to find a group of Tongva who had formerly lived on the island, but they were unsuccessful. 4 words in 2 songs recorded from Johanna Maria suggest she spoke one of the Aztecan languages native to Southern California. With this evidence, they were able to determine the tribe she likely came from. This was published by an anonymous writer in Sacramento's newspaper on October 13th, 1853. The wild woman who was found on the island of San Nicolas, about 70 miles from the coast west of Santa Barbara, is now at the latter place and looked upon as a curiosity. It is stated that she
was some 20 to 18 years alone on the island. She existed on shellfish and the fat of the seal, and dressed in skins of feathers of wild ducks, which she sewed together with skins of seal.
She cannot speak any known language, is good-looking, and about middle age. She seems to be contented with her new home among the good people of Santa Barbara. Joanna Maria is said to have been fascinated and excited when she arrived, admiring the horses and the European clothes and food. She was described as a woman of medium height but quite fat. She was probably about 50 years old, but she was still strong and active. Her face was pleasant because she was always smiling. Her teeth were intact but worn to the gums. Joanna Maria apparently enjoyed the visits of the curious residents of Santa Barbara, singing and dancing to her audience. One popular song is said to translate to, "I contently live because I see the day when I want to get off this island." However, due to a lack of information about Joanna's language, the accuracy of this translation is questionable and may have been an intuitive guess. Just 7 weeks after arriving on the continent, Joanna Maria fell ill of dysentery in Gary, California, which eventually took her life. It was claimed that she had a fondness for green corn, vegetables, and fresh fruit. Years of poor nutrition led to a serious and ultimately fatal illness, and a priest baptized her before her death and gave her a Spanish name, Joanna Maria. She was buried in an unmarked grave in the Santa Barbara Mission Cemetery. The priest made the following entry in the mission's funeral book: "On October 19, 1853, I buried in the church cemetery the remains of Joanna Maria, an Indian brought from the island of San Nicolas, and since there was not one who understood her language, I conditionally baptized her." In 1928, in the Daughters of the American Revolution, placed a plaque in her memory. Joanna Maria's water basket, clothing, and various items brought back from the island, including bone pins, were in collections of the California Academy of Sciences, but were destroyed in the 1906 San Francisco earthquake and fire. Her feather dress she was found in was apparently sent to the Vatican, but seems to have been lost. In 1939, archaeologists discovered that Joanna's whalebone hut, in the northernmost tip of San Nicolas and the island's highest point. The location of the hut corresponded exactly to the descriptions left by the people who found her. In 2009, University of Oregon archaeologists discovered 2 redwood boxers rusted on a sea cliff, covered by whale rib and woven water bottles worn by winter storms. The boxes rescued contained more than 200 artifacts, including pendants made from bird bone, clam dishes, and fish hooks, soapstone ornaments, a sandstone grinder, a harpoon tip. In 2012, working with a student in a California State University, announced they discovered the buried remains of a cave where Joanna Maria may have lived. However, archaeological research into the cave was suspended at the request of natives who claim to be culturally related to the ancient inhabitants of the island. At this point, I have far deviated from the topic I originally set out to discuss, modern mysterious men. Though that is okay, I'm sure you don't mind. In my research, I was led to different stories that I found interesting and wanted to share. I hope you also find them interesting. Of course you do. You want to still be here if you didn't.